Hey everyone, I wanted to respond to the Skeptical Heretic's video he made to me about the financial crisis. And this is going to be audio only because I don't really have time to set up my video equipment here, but he keeps talking about the market forces and the invisible hand being the cause of all this, and he tries to, link it all to the dot-com bubble. And I remember the dot-com bubble very well, and I was working in IT at the time, and I also had a job where I was teaching computer networking, and so I talked to a lot of people about this. And yeah, there's a lot of what Alan Greenspan called irrational exuberance, and I was talking to people who were saying things like, well, all I have to do is set up a website, and if I can just get 1 million people to give me $1, I'll be a millionaire. And I'd be like, okay, great. How are you going to do that? And they just kind of assume that the internet was this pot of gold and that people would just come to you, and of course it doesn't work like that. Then, of course, once the bubble burst and it all went down, everyone was saying, oh, well, that's it, the internet fad's over. And I was like, no, it's not. The problem was you had all of the people like the guy I just told you about, who basically thought he could just get free money. They're the ones who went away. The ones who stuck around were the ones like Amazon and eBay. Those were the two examples I used at the time. And, of course, they're still around because they had a good business model. So he talks about all of this and all about how the players don't have the knowledge that they needed to make the right decisions. But he doesn't really go into why he thinks the invisible hand is responsible for this. And what mechanism does the invisible hand have of giving everyone bad information? So he's absolutely right when he talks about lowering the interest rate to try and spur the economy, leading us into the housing bubble. But there's a lot of things he just doesn't get about that. When you lower the interest rate, he says you drive away bond investment. That's true, you do, but you also drive away all other sorts of investment as well. The supply and demand equilibrium works in the investment market as well. The price of an investment is the interest rate. You have the supply, which is all of the money that people have that they would be willing to provide at different interest rates. And then you have the demand. And of course, the higher the interest rate, the more people are going to want to invest more money. The lower interest rate, the more people are going to want to borrow. So they're pushing down the interest rates. That drives investors away, but that also makes all these borrowers come out of the woodwork. And that's where we are now. We still have these ridiculously low interest rates, and as a result, investment is still the one metric of GDP that hasn't reached its pre-crisis level. Because if the interest rates are that low, people are going to say, well, I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to get much of a rate on my return. And they might be a little skittish as well because of everything that's been going on in the market. So they may say, well, I'll just spend it, which is what they say we need. Oh, we need people to spend and consume. And well, but they've been doing that and we still haven't recovered. And we still got all this unemployment and everything. Well, that's because we didn't do enough. Oh, come on. Yeah. And the patient died because we didn't use enough leeches. So here's the thing that the skeptical heretic needs to realize. The interest rate is the measure of the risk of an investment. The riskier an investment is, the higher the interest rate. If you're a new business and you're using an unproven business model and you're going around trying to sell bonds, trying to get people to invest in your business, you're probably going to have to offer a higher interest rate just to attract the kind of investments you want. And that's actually going to be a little bit of a mitigating effect, because if the interest rate is too high, you might think, well, gee, I'm not sure if down the road I'll be able to pay off that interest rate, and that'll kind of make you rethink things a little bit about starting your business or how you're going to go about doing it. No, all of this happened not because of the invisible hand of the free market, but because of false signals generated by the Fed in pushing these interest rates down to the floor. And the best analogy I heard about this, and I'm sorry I don't remember who it was. If someone in the comments knows who it was that made this analogy, then please post it so we can give the proper credit. But it's the best analogy I've heard about this. Let's say that you're in a high-rise corner office building, and you and your friend are looking down from your glass windows and you see the traffic intersection below, and the lights are green one way and red the other way, and so the cars are going through. Then it turns red one way and green the other way, and they start going through the other way. Well, now imagine that the lights go green all four ways. And what happens? All the cars start running into each other. And now there's all this traffic and everything gets backed up. There's all these accidents and And your friend says to you, you know why that happened? It's because those drivers were greedy. Those were greedy drivers. They just couldn't wait to get to where they were going. Now, what would you say to him? You think maybe those false signals may have had something to do with it? Because when you come across an intersection and there's a green light, what the green light is actually telling you is that there are red lights the other way, and therefore those people are going to stop and you can go safely through. If that green light is lying to you and the other way is green as well, then cars are going to run into each other. Now, this is not people being left to their own devices. This is people responding to a false signal. People being left to their own devices would be something along the lines of what I experienced a few months ago. There's this really bad intersection near where I live, just clogged up with traffic, and you have to sit through like 3 or 4 cycles of the light to get through. Well, I was coming home one day going through this intersection, and the lights were out. I mean out completely. Not even the other flashing yellow or red or whatever. Out. Blank. Nothing. So what happened? Did people start running into each other like, in our scenario where it's green all 4 ways? No. Everyone slowed down and kind of just took turns going through. And it was actually pretty amazing. This is more like the invisible hand. Everyone kind of self-organized, sort of, and we all got through the intersection. We got through very slowly. But I think we also got through a lot faster than we would have if we had to sit through 4 cycles of the light and do all that stopping. Because there was no stopping. There was just kind of creeping along slowly, and everyone just kind of let everyone else take their turns, and everything that worked out. So don't confuse the invisible hand, which is when all the lights just go out, to a situation where you have bad signals. It's green all 4 ways. And this is the reason for things like he mentions Tulip Mania. Tulip Mania was yet another bubble that was the result of an increasing money supply. And I'll put a link in a video info box to where you can read more about that and how money generation led to that. But this goes back to what I talked about in another video, why Keynesian stimulus is not investment and where the bubble comes from. This isn't the invisible hand doing it. It's the fact that government fiscal and monetary policy makes it look as if there are more resources in the economy than there really are. The invisible hand makes sure that all investments are some sort of deferred wealth, that some people are foregoing buying things or otherwise consuming in the economy to invest. And those resources that they're given up can then be used elsewhere by whomever the person is invested in. They can now use those resources. That doesn't happen when you have a bubble. Money creation or stimulus spending or whatever, it just gives the appearance that people are investing. People aren't really investing. No one is foregoing using any of their resources. That's not connected with a decision to give up those resources. And so it looks like a lot more resources are available to them than there really are. So demand looks a lot higher than it is. It's really a lot lower. And this is exactly what happened in the tech bubble. If the demand for the domain names really were as high as it appeared in the tech bubble, those would have been perfectly reasonable prices to ask for them. Same with the housing bubble. If there was really as much of a demand for housing as there appeared to be during those years, those increased prices would have been perfectly fine. But like our travelers given the green light, they assume that other people are stopping when they aren't. And it's just too much and the economy can't take it, and so the boom becomes a bust. And he talks about things like the CDOs. There would be absolutely nothing wrong with those CDOs without the Fed pushing those interest rates to the floor. But since interest rates are how banks manage risk, when they buy that package, the interest rate makes it look as if those mortgages are less risky than they really are. And there's not enough money coming in interest to cover up the ones that default. Whereas if the interest rates had been allowed to go to equilibrium, they would likely have been covered. Same with the default swaps. The default swaps would have worked just fine if the interest rates had properly reflected the risk of the loans. But again, it was thanks to the Fed's monetary policy that meant that they didn't. There wasn't enough money coming in interest to make up for it, and that's why you had that problem across the board. The invisible hand absolutely depends on the equilibrium of the market to work, and when government monkeys around like that, we don't expect it to work that well. any more than we would expect people who trust the green light to be able to predict the accident they're about to get in. I will give him this much. He's the first person on that side I've talked to who realizes the Glass-Steagall wasn't repealed, but he still doesn't quite understand the full ramifications. To my knowledge, the only other country that ever separated investment and commercial banks was Belgium. Canada never did it, and yet they neatly avoided this crisis by not playing the same game we did, not monkeying with interest rates. In fact, they did an across-the-board budget cut and truly let the invisible hand protect them, which it pretty much did. No, as I've pointed out time and time again, this little bit of what's called deregulation actually ended up extending FDIC protection to mortgage accounts. See, Glass-Steagall created the FDIC, and when it passed, Congress was at least aware enough of a moral hazard to say that, hey, we probably don't want to guarantee investment accounts. We just want to guarantee people's savings. So they made this division. But removing that separation now means that FDIC protections are extended to mortgage accounts, and so $100,000 out of every mortgage account was guaranteed by the government. And at some point it got raised to $250,000. I'm not sure when. It might have been after the crisis happened. But whether it was $100,000, $250,000, the point is, those banks could then be as risky as they wanted to with that money and still be protected. And this is something that people have to understand. When they just look at greed, they're missing the other half of the equation. The other half is loss aversion. Greed means you want more than what you have. Loss aversion means you want to keep what you have. You don't want to lose it. You're averse to the loss. And so what happened was not people being greedy, or people have always been greedy. What happened was people were less averse to loss because government was going to come and protect them. The FDIC was protecting them. Fannie and Freddie was protecting them. The Fed was there, ready to jump in and create money and bail them out. And of course, the government was going to do the bailouts and the stimulus packages. All that is doing is teaching them that they don't have to be loss averse. They don't have to be loss averse. They can be as risky as they want, and government will come along and bail them out. That is the problem. Now, talking about the foreclosures, he mentioned, when they returned their house to the mortgage holder couldn't sell the houses. Anyone who's taken a basic economics class will tell you why that is. The house is way overvalued and the price needs to drop. Now, of course, if the price drops, they don't get as much money and maybe they don't get as much to cover it. But it's better than not selling it. So this is a concept known as market clearing. There are all these so-called toxic assets built, all these houses built that are more than the economy could sustain at the time, and they're being sold at too high a price. You've got to have market clearing to fix the situation, and that means that housing prices have to come down. As long as the Fed keeps trying to push up housing prices, you're never going to get market clearing. And this is actually why I have a little bit of a problem with the Austrians on this one, because they keep talking about the Keynesian practice of the Fed. Well, when I read Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, a famous economist, I see him saying that the reason why the economy doesn't cover is because prices are too sticky. They can't move around and seek equilibrium like they should. And that's why we need the government money and the central bank and everything. They need to, grease the gears and get everything moving again, prime the pump and all that. That's not what Bernanke is doing. Bernanke is trying to keep housing prices where they are. He's trying to make them sticky. That's the exact opposite of what Keynes said to do. And I really don't know what the skeptical heretic means by, let's hope the Fed continues to raise the interest rates. Excuse me? Bernanke's policy is to keep forcing the interest rates down. The most recent federal funds rate the New York Fed has published is from Friday, July 5th, and it's 0.1%. Now, for the sake of comparison, long-term Treasury bonds rates are around 3.5%. So what does that mean? That means that if you're a bank, you can go and you can borrow money from the Fed at 0.1%, then use that to turn around and buy Treasury bonds at 3.5%, and then you're making money when that money is not tied to any sort of production. Because normally what banks do is they borrow from an investor, like if you put your money in a CD or whatever, and they'll pay you a certain amount of interest, then they'll loan it out to someone else for a greater amount of interest, and the difference between the interest rate they pay you, and the interest rate they charge the lender, that's their profit. But that's based on the idea that the lender's going to be able to pay it back by being more productive. He's going to work at a job where he's making all this money and whatever, and be able to pay it back. Or if it's a business, they're going to expand and they're going to increase their market share and do whatever they do to make more money. This isn't based on any of that. It's just a closed loop, and it's not tied to any sort of production in the economy. And I think I have to call him on another straw man. No one says the economy is infinite. Desires are infinite, but resources are finite. So the question is, how can we best use the finite resources to fulfill as many of our desires as we can? And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about being greedy versus being loss-averse. So the greed is what keeps you pushing forward. Loss aversion is what holds you back. Loss aversion keeps you going too far. And the more the government comes in to try to protect you, to protect the banks or protect the consumer or, protect the people who have money in their bank accounts with the FDIC or whatever, the more they do that, the less averse people are going to be to losses and the less they're going to be held back. And he also mentions that this is all because of the dot-com burst in 2000. It's a continuation of that, but I don't think that's where it began. I'd go back even further and say we're still feeling the effects from the 80s bubble. Because, in the 70s, we had a terrible economy, and it was actually similar to what it was. We had high inflation and high interest rates. But aside from the magnitude, it's the same it was. The interest rate was lower than the inflation rate. And so with negative real interest rates, you don't really get much in the way of investment and economic activity. So Paul Volcker reversed the policy of the Fed, which was to push down interest rates just like Bernanke is now. He let interest rates rise, and they got up to something ridiculous like 20%, but then the economy recovered in a year. They say, well, he created a recession by doing that. Yeah, but a recession is the economy moving everything back around to where it needs to be. So that's what needed to happen. And then, of course, people didn't learn the lessons, and Reagan juiced up the deficits and got the economy, officially going a lot better. But again, it was a bubble. It just looked as if there was more demand than there was. And people talk about the materialism of the 80s and the high consumerism and the desire for things. That's exactly where that came from. They were no longer averse to as many losses because they thought there were greater gains out there to be had than there really were. And so they bought fancy houses and fancy cars and boats and all this sort of stuff. And of course it hit the fan, and we've never really recovered from that. So that's my response to The Skeptical Heretic. And as I've said in so many other videos, stay strong and be free.